Hello, this is Associate Professor Heather Alexander from Learning Futures at Griffith University, and I'd like to talk to you about two examples of national standards projects looking at peer review of assessment. Those two projects are, firstly, the OLT-ALTC supported Learning and Teaching Standards project, which I was involved in, and secondly, the Innovative Research Universities, or IRU, Academic Calibration project, which I'm also involved in. The IRU project is a modification of the methodology used in the Group of 8 Quality Verification of Standards project. So this gives you two different examples of a peer review project, and the one at the bottom of the slide, Achievement Matters, will be explained by Associate Professor Mark Freeman on a second recording. This slide shows the 11 universities involved in the project team, and the two leaders, Professors Kerry Lee Krause and Jeff Scott. The aim of the project was to test an approach out for interinstitutional blind peer review of learning and teaching standards. We used final year undergraduate units, accounting for program level outcomes, external reference points and discipline standards. Now, the blind peer review in this project is important, and it makes it distinctive from the other projects that you'll hear about today. And with the final year undergraduate units, we tried to get exactly the same unit in different courses, but it's just impossible to do. So we went for comparable final year undergraduate units. This project is unique in using not just one partner for reviewing the samples of student work, but using two partners. So the home institution material would come to the project team electronically and be sent out to both of the partner reviewers. All of the institutions were de-identified in that process. We covered 11 universities and that range of disciplines which you can see on the slide. We intentionally included performance-based subjects in the creative arts so that we could test that the system would work with very different kinds of assessment items. We used peer review of de-identified unit inputs as well as the student samples. So the inputs included the unit outlines, the assessment tasks, all of them, the marking criteria and information about program level learning outcomes. The peer review of the learning standards we also used for blind marking of 4 de-identified assessment artefacts across 4 grade bands. And qualitative and quantitative data were collected on all of those things. What did we find? Look, the majority of assessments showed strong agreement with the original score and grade, but we did find some differences, and what we did in the project was return those to the institution for follow-up or discussion. Key to this project moving forward in the future, though, is how robust our institutional processes are for dealing with feedback about levels of disagreement about grades. A couple of quotes from some staff that you'll see on these slides, the value of the project and the value of being involved in it. The first quote is from a physics academic who says, quote, "I'm not particularly interested in government requirements, but I do care about the discipline and maintaining of a broad standard across Australia and genuinely knowing where we stand compared to other places." The second is a philosophy quote. "It was interesting to see the standards moving fairly close to one another in relation to the marking practices, so I think that was a good thing to come out of it." Some further quotes from a law academic, that they would benefit, and the practice would benefit from having a benchmark against other universities. And it was good for academics to actually see what other people were doing and how they were approaching their courses and how they were approaching their assessment. The law academic's quote goes on to say that it made me reflect on my standards. Our teaching team may be a little bit too strict or a bit too harsh when I looked at some of the other work. Quote from an academic in Chinese, "It was fantastic to be able to look at someone else's unit and have an idea of how someone who's in a similar position to me might be teaching this subject." And they've had seen changes in the way the courses are being delivered because of their involvement. What were the challenges? Firstly, a need for a culture change. Academics are not used to doing this, and there was, in some instances, a sense of threat of that external critique of standards. But hopefully that we were able to reduce that by many of the things that we did in the project, which I'll explain in a moment. It is an extra workload for academic staff. We had a lot of difficulty identifying comparable units, but we eventually did find them. There are some ethical issues in the creative arts. We did look at this at length and worked with all the institutions and reviewed our consent forms for participation to make sure we protected people in those areas. Thinking at the program level is still quite new, or particularly at the time of this project, it was still quite a new thing to think about. And we found that the reference points for professional judgments of standards were really quite tacit, and people were often not able to articulate exactly what they were using as a reference point. Some of the actions to meet these challenges, we kept the data confidential to unit coordinators and project staff, so their data would not be identified or sent to anybody else. We didn't identify institutions either, although in odd circumstances where we had to use a web-based resource, it's obviously impossible to de-identify the institution. We had a participant agreement for signing. We did extend deadlines quite a bit in recognising the extra workload that we were asking of academics. What did we learn? The initial site visits we conducted to communicate to the staff and get staff engagement in the project and explain what it was all about were really critical, particularly to deal with that cultural shift that was needed. We found we have to take care with the language in peer review and training, and this is actually probably going to be important in the future. That we could de-emphasise finding comparable units and rely on the expertise of peer reviewers. Incentives were helpful. We did pay a small sum to those involved, which they could use in whatever way they wanted. It wasn't a large amount of money, but it was just a small incentive. Whether or not you need the de-identification of which university is both reviewing and reviewee of the work is still for discussion. The triangulation proved to be very interesting to see the difference between two reviewers as well as the two reviewers and the home institution. We need to think about which grade bands you consider and include as a routine. It was very important to put contextual information in about the unit, and we actually found that in some instances, particularly those dealing with geographical spread, they were very keen on putting in that contextual information to explain why their course and their assessment particularly was set up the way it was. We found in virtually all situations we had to allow more time than expected for the review to happen. We definitely needed the administrative and project support. That's very important in this, and it shouldn't be ignored. And we did have a couple of sensitive issues between academics that we needed the senior people and the teams to manage. Unexpected successes, building capacity among participants, value of collegial conversations. We had debriefing conferences after each of the markings were complete within each discipline, and that proved to be very interesting and led to some scholarly outputs and the desire to produce scholarly outputs from discipline-based groups. We started off with 8 partners, and we ended up with 11 as we recruited 3 more along the way. So it proved to be quite a popular process, and people were keen to be involved. There is a project website which is on the final slide there for this project, which has all of the resources and the handbook there, and you're welcome to use it. The second project I'd like to go through is the IRU academic calibration process, and acknowledgements firstly to the group of 8 for granting permission for us to modify their process to our purposes. While the projects have their differences, the alignment is quite strong, and we certainly look forward to greater cooperation across the sector. The distinctive features of this one is each university sets its own schedule for the calibration exercise. It's aiming to test a formal capstone unit or the best proxy for a final year capstone unit, and for that unit we take the main assessment task is nominated for calibration. The initial intention of this project was that as programs would come up for program review, then the capstone unit would be selected for external peer review. So it was done on a regular basis. We use senior discipline-specific academics, level C and above, although we have now agreed to use level B if they've got significant experience in the field. And we can do it in professionally accredited courses depending on whether or not the peer review already happens in that external calibration. The core elements of the ACP, it's firstly de-identified but not the institution at the institution level, just de-identified of the student and the student's name. It's a purposely selected sample of student work, and the reviewers report on the appropriateness of the grades awarded to the samples of students' work and the appropriateness and comparative quality of the learning outcomes, the assessment tasks, the assessment criteria and assessment processes. So it's quite a full and detailed report that goes back to the original course code. The ACP approach is quality verification. It's not a moderation of grades by external examiners, so these original student grades are not changed at all through this process in terms of their university results. And it's not blind review, blind marking, as we've just seen in the previous project. All original marks and comments from the original course coordinator stay on the student's work. And so the reviewer sees all of that and just simply indicates whether they think they agree with the grade, it's too high or it's too low. What the home university sends to a reviewer is the program structure and learning outcomes, the course profile with its course learning outcomes and the assignment details or assessment details, how the learning outcomes of this course relate to the program level learning outcomes, de-identified copies of the actual assessment tasks with all the comments and feedback, the grading criteria and marking guide used for the assessment tasks, the grade distribution of the results, and all the grade nomenclature and categories used by the university. It's a purposely selected sample of 3 assignments or assessments within each of the passing grades. So that's pass, credit, distinction and high distinction, or their equivalent in the institution. The items are selected from the bottom, the midpoint and the top of the grade range as they're marked with comments and feedback. The examiner sends back a cover sheet and quite a lot of comments on all of the inputs, but the cover sheet has the table as shown on that slide where the number they've reviewed in each grade band, where they've agreed and where they think it to be unduly high and unduly low, and there is space also for comments to explain their reasoning. The publication of review summaries, what's been agreed that at a minimum the IRU universities will indicate that they're participating in calibration exercises and the model used for the calibration, but it's up to the universities what else they make public, although most universities will use the fact that they're participating in this in their reports to TEXA. So looking at the projects, you can see different levels. Down at level 1 is the ongoing consensus moderation and calibration that are used on a day-to-day basis between academics. Level 2 is a cyclical process of externally checking against external points such as accreditation or external advisory committees. Level 3 is a cyclical process of interinstitutional peer review using a verification of learning standards so that the reviewer doesn't have to remark completely, they've just got to indicate whether they agree or disagree. And level 4 is the first project that I presented, and that is the interinstitutional peer review with blind peer review and perhaps more than just one partner. Running across those, all those levels, is the need for calibration of academic staff, and I will leave Professor Mark Freeman to speak to you in a separate slide set about achievement matters and his experience of the calibration of academic staff.